All right, back to live performance. And our next speaker from HUD is going in a little different direction. We always like to try and cover as many programs as we can. And the leader in vouchers, Section 8 existing vouchers in New York is Chris Ingram from the Office of Public and Indian Housing here in the New York office. And he'd like to speak to you about some new developments and what's going on in the voucher program. And any of you with vouchers, please ask questions. Chris has been a constant at every one of our seminars, and he's always a favorite. Here he is, Chris Ingram.
Thank you. Good morning. I guess we're bumping up into lunch hour, so I'll try to be brief. Again, I'm Chris Ingram. I'm the director of the Housing Management Division in the Office of Public Housing here in New York. Our jurisdiction goes from Long Island up to Sullivan, Ulster, and Dutchess counties. We don't have too much, my office, my staff, we don't have too much interaction with project owners, management agents. Of course, when buildings opt out of the Section 8 multifamily programs, you decouple or prepay your 236 or opt out of the Section 8 contract, then my office gets involved in securing the vouchers and contracting with the local housing authority to administer those vouchers. Or there's plenty of buildings in the city, regardless of conversions, that you might have just regular vouchers from the housing authority, HPD or HCR already living there. I just wanted to talk a little bit, I'm sure it probably came up earlier, I missed the morning earlier sessions, but I want to talk a little bit about sequestration and its impact on our programs in the Office of Public Housing, particularly the Section 8 vouchers. Under sequestration, the administrative fees earned by local housing agencies is prorated at 69%, a huge cut to these housing agencies. So for example, if, I have no idea the specific numbers, but if HPD was earning $100 million to administer, or is eligible, would be eligible to earn in administering the voucher program in New York City, this year they'd only be getting, these are just made up numbers, but just to give you an idea, they'd only be receiving $69 million. So it's a huge funding cut in the money available to run the day-to-day operations of the Section 8 voucher program. As of now, I'm not aware or haven't seen any direct impact yet on how the program's administered, but you can imagine yourselves moving forward as we go through the rest of 2013 that a cut of that significance will likely have some impact, negative impact on the HCR, HPD, and NYAHMA's ability to efficiently administer the Section 8 voucher program. And that, of course, would then might have an impact on owners who rent to voucher holders regarding customer service or follow-up with the housing agency or resolving disputes where they might not have the administrative resources that they used to have in order to administer the program. Also, there was an impact with sequestration on the money available to pay landlord HAPs, housing assistance payments. This funding was prorated at 94%, which of course compared to 69% is better, but still has an impact. In New York City, throughout the country, this is an issue, of course, throughout the country. Housing agencies are grappling with this problem. We have a process in place where HUD in Washington identifies agencies, whether we anticipate that they might have a shortfall or run out of HAP funding before the end of the year based on what they're paying out now, the number of families under lease, and other factors. So we have a process, we identify them, we work with them to reduce their expenses. In New York City, again, the three agencies that we're talking about, we are not anticipating a significant shortfall, although all three agencies at this point in time, or none of the agencies at this point in time, are issuing new vouchers. Nudge, of course, has, excuse me, hasn't issued vouchers since about December 2009, and it's hard to say that HPD and HCR are not issuing any new vouchers themselves. It can have a specific connection, I guess, to multifamily owners, in that we're also dealing with the, I don't know if it came up earlier, the rental assistance demonstration program. So if you're one of those owners that are converting your rent supplement contract to the project-based vouchers under RAD, it doesn't directly affect the owners or the conversion, but one of the things we talk about in the tenant briefings is how under project-based vouchers, the regulations allow them after 1 year to move. They have to go to the housing authority, and the housing authority would issue them the next available voucher to move. Of course, your assistance is still tied to the unit. The family gets a new voucher, so to speak, or a turnover voucher to move. Under the current funding environment, for example, I mean, we're not there yet with RAD, and none of the, well, we may have, I guess we have one that was effective April 1st, and some are going to convert effective later this year. And that wouldn't be until a year after that where it might become an issue for families wanting to move. But say, for example, if you had families now under project-based voucher contract to, you know, anticipate being able to receive a voucher to move after that 1 year, if they went to any of the 3 housing agencies at this point in time, you know, they would tell them that they're not issuing any vouchers and they'd have to wait until they resume doing so. We do this, you know, with the funding, we anticipate, or our understanding is that for regular conversions, if you prepay 236 or decouple, that enhanced vouchers are still available. Headquarters has been a little restrictive in giving out the money. They've been giving them out instead of an annual increment. They've been giving them out in 3-month increments, but we don't anticipate any problems with obtaining vouchers if you move forward and convert from the multifamily housing program. The last thing, and then I'll open it up for questions. There was a notice recently published by the Office of Public Housing. It's notice 2013-8. It's on our website, HUD.gov. This notice is quite extensive, so I'm really not going to talk much about it other than to alert you that it's out there, and it provides funding. I believe my understanding is the law passed by Congress allowed HUD to use up to $10 million. Right now, because of the funding situation, they're only allowing up to $4 million, but it could go up to $10 million depending on what happens to the rest of the year. But anyway, my understanding is basically that this funding is for either project-based or enhanced vouchers for properties that wouldn't be typically eligible to convert under RAD, or wouldn't be able to, or typically would not be eligible to convert under the regular enhanced voucher conversion process that's been in existence for over 10 years at this point. And so it's properties that up until now would not be eligible for voucher funding. So they have this, they appropriated this special pot of money right now, $4 million for this. One of the big differences with this, as opposed to past conversions or RAD conversions that you might be familiar with, is that there's a specific application process and a deadline date for owners to apply. And it's my understanding it's a first come, first serve for eligible properties. So the application deadline is June 14th. But you'd want to, or I suggest that you take a look at this notice. It's 2013-8. And if it appears you're eligible, then to submit your application to the New York Multifamily Hub and copy your HUD project manager as soon as possible. And if there's any questions?
Any questions on vouchers? Any kind of vouchers? Project-based, tenant-based?
Yeah.
Yes?
So in terms of the vouchers that are recycled, that are recycled, which are really the only vouchers, Are the preferences still the same, for, different for each agency, or how does that work? Since we have such a dire situation in Section 8 vouchers, and a lot of us manage buildings that have commitments to house homeless people, and the underwriting with the city required us, those homeless families, to have vouchers in order for some of these buildings to kind of work in the underwriting with, say, HDC. Is there any talk about, what the preferences are? Is it still the agency can really decide? Is there a federal mandate of what preferences are? Because we'd like to see those go, some of us would like to see those go to homeless families first, so we can fill our commitments we've made to the city to house, homeless families and deal with that issue.
Sure, and these properties do not have a commitment from the housing authority to project-based?
No, these are typically low-income housing tax credit buildings with a 20% homeless set-aside. That was part of the regulatory agreement with HPD, and the idea was that there were going to be voucher holders to fill these places, because the homeless families cannot afford a 60% or an 80% rent. So the voucher was really going to cover that, and if it's a small building, 20% could be a significant financial hit if we can't backfill with vouchers.
Sure.
Especially after Sandy. That's another thing we're getting. We're getting a lot of, thank you, Cynthia. We're getting a lot of, the city is sending us a lot of, list of people, Sandy eligible families, and when we talk to them, many of them are under income for the programs we have and for the rents we have, even though they're low rents.
I guess a couple of things. One is that unfortunately at this specific point in time, and hopefully it might change as we go through the year, but all three agencies in New York City are not, if you will, recycling vouchers at this point in time. If somebody in NYCHA, for example, for over 3.5 years now, if someone turns back their voucher, they don't issue another one. So right now, there's no recycling going on. If and when they do, it is still up to the local housing agencies to have their priorities. We have, as you're probably familiar, Secretary Donovan, one of his priorities is addressing the homeless, and we've had discussions in our office with NYCHA, HPD. Well, HPD does have, as you are aware, HPD does do a significant number of vouchers for the homeless. And also what we've discussed with HCR and NYCHA. And at this point in time, it does not look like there's going to be any movement to target or have a preference for homeless families. And just to touch on a related note, or you mentioned Sandy, we are moving, the HUD and FEMA are moving forward on a DHAP, a Disaster Housing Assistance Program for Sandy survivors. We just had a kind of kickoff meeting yesterday, actually, in our office, and so there will be that additional resource for, particularly, I guess, for some of the lower income survivors to help them. It will be time limited though, and this doesn't, I guess, directly impact multifamily project owners, but just in the affordable housing sense of things, there is that program coming down the road soon to help Sandy victims.
Hi, any other voucher questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said that HPD and NYCHA are not recycling. What is the reason for that?
Sure. Well, basically, under the it could be. I was going to initially say under the sequester, and that's part of it. NYCHA again has you will recycle vouchers, and that's not 100%, I guess, accurate in that NYCHA has vouchers for veterans, VASH, which is the single HUD program that was excluded from the sequester, and so they do issue vouchers for homeless veterans. But for the regular population, the voucher program is it used to be a unit, I guess, based program where they would get as much money as they needed to lease up to, they could lease up to their, what we call their baseline, and NYCHA's baseline is about 99,000 vouchers. That's changed some number of years ago where it's based on funding, and so there could be different circumstances, but generally speaking, throughout the country, and I think for at least in HPD and HCR's case, is that you know, they had a certain number of families leased. Their funding this year, we basically simply put, and without getting into all the weeds, but HUD looks at what the appropriations bill says, you know, tells us, we look at what the Housing Authority spent in, for voucher rents in calendar year 2012, get that number on a national basis, reduce it by 94%, that's what we're giving out to housing agencies. So the only way to make it through the year without running out of money is to, the first thing agencies doing, and what HPD and HCR are doing, is to stop reissuing vouchers. Some agencies are, and we don't see that happening at this point in New York City, but some agencies have to reduce subsidy levels, payment standards, and get a waiver to do it immediately, where families would end up, you know, having to pay more than 30% out of pocket, and other avenues. And the end result is HUD will, you know, work with the PHAs to avoid families getting terminated, but the first thing is to stop issuing new vouchers and largely due to the reduced funding this 2013.
So it's because of the 6% cut, they have to do this, and is the idea that if sequestration, you know, gets resolved, that the vouchers will start being issued again?
I mean, the sequestration, I don't know, you know, what'll happen in Washington. My, you know, sense, or, you know, no different than, you know, anybody reading the newspapers or watching the news, is that we're kind of locked into where we are for this year. And then what happens in 2014, I mean, I guess you would anticipate, you know, in future years that once they bring the program size down to a certain level, then they'll be able to do at least normal backfill or reissuance that like they have in the past. But I would, you know, say that I don't expect any real change or any additional, really, they would require additional money going after them this year, and I don't see that happening.
Anything else?
I just have one question that was brought up to me, Chris. It has to do with HUD's oversight of internal transfers of vouchers on subsidized projects. There's a case that HPD for subsidized projects, 236 for instance, is very strict about using internal transfers before you can take outside tenants. NYCHA is taking over a year to approve those because they're doing emergencies first and external transfers to new buildings, lease ending. What type of oversight does HUD have? Because what is being created is you're keeping a subsidized unit vacant for the next person in the internal without being able to transfer that person because you're going to have NYCHA do it.
Can you, I guess, not sound somewhat familiar to an issue we dealt with NYCHA some years ago, but so you have a multi-family 236 with a voucher tenant.
HPD is making you use the internal waiting list to transfer it over-occupied, under-occupied, whatever it is to the right size. So you have to keep this unit open for this under-housed family that now has 6 kids and then they moved in to move.
But NYCHA won't.
NYCHA has priorities, and their priority is the emergencies, you know, the battered spouses.
So they won't process. I mean, well, is it, because we've had an issue with NYCHA, and we'll, based on this, we'll follow up and we'll, you know, get back to you, Hunter, and you can get back to the group. But and we've had some issues with NYCHA where, that, you know, families with a voucher, you're entitled to move. There's some limitations. They can limit you to 1 move a year, and things like that. Or if you owe money to your landlord, they can say you don't move. But basically, you have a voucher and entitled to move. I know with NYCHA, administratively, several years ago, we had an issue where they would process moves, ports that they refer to as ports when they're moving outside of New York City. And I guess administrative resources, staffing, they didn't have sufficient staff to handle moves within the city as timely. as they did for people moving outside the city. So is the person talking about moving already have a voucher?
They have a voucher, they just want to move across the hall
Yeah.
or upstairs. NYCHA makes you first, when they finally get to you, after they do all the emergencies and all the moving out of the city, they want you to schedule you have to go through a training, you have to go through a conference. And these people don't need it, they're in the building, they just want to move across the hall.
And we'll follow up with, because that was a concern, and we thought at least it had been addressed for some period of time, and it might have reared its head again, and we'll follow the NYCHA and watch them again.
Well, thank you very much. It is indeed a special pleasure for me to introduce the keynote speaker. This person knows probably more about and been involved more about HUD affordable housing than anyone else I can think of in the state of New York. But more than that, this person is responsible for NYAHMA being formed. Because when she was the New York Multifamily Hub Director, she took her valuable time to try and fill a void which she saw in the lack of communication between the industry and the regulators, and wanted a group to be formed that could be more flexible in arranging the kinds of seminars and meetings that we're having. She went on from that job to be the commissioner of DHCR, and she is still heavily involved in affordable housing programs, working with Nixon Peabody. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Deborah Barrow.
Thank you, Hunter, and thank you, Greg, for inviting me to be here today. I have to admit, when I urged the industry to form an association, part of it was motivated because the acronym for this organization in New Jersey is JAHMA, which sounds, I have to say, just a little bit cooler than NYAHMA. But I'm delighted that the industry got together and does continue to get together to talk with the agencies and talk amongst yourselves about what's going on, and I'm thrilled to be here today. I know that you've all had a long morning, and I had prepared remarks. I'm going to try to truncate them so you can get to your lunch and also get back to work in your offices. As you know, or if you had seen earlier versions of the agenda, we were supposed to have some senior officials here from HUD DC, in addition to our HUD officials from New York. Unfortunately, you guys probably are tired of hearing the word sequestration. I know I am. But unfortunately, they were unable to be here with us today. Hunter reached out to me to ask me if I'd be willing to step in, not because I work for HUD in Washington, but because I deal with HUD nationally on a very regular basis and follow the developments there. So I'm happy to step in and try to share at least some of my insights as to what's going on and what we might see going forward. I am just going to spend a couple of minutes on sequestration because, again, I know it's been covered in a number of different ways already today. I have to say, and backing up what Chris Ingram said, and I'll be very frank about it, I think sequestration is here to stay. I do not believe that the funding levels that have been cut are going to be restored to the federal budget. This is, for lack of a better way of saying, this is the new normal. Whatever happens with funding going forward in future years' budget, we'll be working off of this as the new baseline. And I don't know, I apologize I wasn't able to be here first thing this morning. I don't know how much you talked about the impact on project-based Section 8. It is, and I expect a lot of you have buildings where you administer project-based Section 8. The way I would characterize it, and HUD put out a notice to owners and managers, if you have not seen it or if you haven't seen the information that Chris was talking about, HUD has been very helpful. They've created a whole section on their website that has sequestration information for all different types of programs. So some of it's for public housing authorities, some of it's for owners and managers, some of it's for grantees under CDBG and home. There's really specific information for each program. The information for the project-based Section 8 program, in my mind, if you read it, it's a little bit, sometimes, no offense to anybody at HUD, I felt this when I was there, sometimes you read something, you're like, well, what does that mean? But the way I view it is, we're actually going back to what it was prior to the ARA Act and the additional money being provided for project-based Section 8. In that act, if you recall, you were dealing with short funding on a very regular basis in your project-based Section 8 buildings at that time, going back to 06, 07, 08. A lot of stuff going on between HUD and Congress and the Office of Management and Budget in Washington, but the funds often were short, and HUD had to only give you a portion of your funding for a year and then make it up. It is a very unfortunate situation for you guys as owners and managers, because it makes a lot more work for you, creates a lot of uncertainty in buildings about your finances. You have to go in and ask for money from your reserve accounts to keep things going, all of that. But it's also really unfortunate for the HUD staff, because it means double and triple processing sometimes for them on getting these contracts out. So it's obviously beyond their control, so I'd ask you to be patient about it. Secretary Donovan made this a priority at the very beginning of the Obama administration to get, if you recall, he put a big chunk of money in what was known as the Stimulus Act to get HUD caught up. And since that time, funding has been much more regular, and you've been able to get 12 months funding for a 12-month contract, and it hasn't been an issue. I'm sad to stand here and report that I think we're going back to the days where you're going to be short funded on contracts, at least for the foreseeable future. I know HUD, and particularly HUD here in New York, will do everything they can to get you as much funding and get your contract processed quickly, but that's the news I have to report, that I think that's the reality. Chris talked about the voucher program and some of the impacts of sequestration on that, so I'm not going to go into it. The other thing that I would talk about, and again, this isn't directly related to sequestration because it was going on, before people had even talked to, before there was a budget impasse last year, or before there was a super committee created, and before the super committee failed to come together, all of those things. HUD was already looking at the Section 8 program with concerns about its funding levels, the project-based Section 8 program I'm talking about. They have concerns on the voucher side too, but I expect many more of you participate. Although you may have voucher residents who live in your building may be primarily dependent on your project-based Section 8. And that is, HUD is looking, aggressively. I'm sure you've probably talked at some previous NYAHMA meeting about the notice that was put out about accessing money in your residual receipts account. If you're what's known as a new regulation, Section 8 building, HUD actually controls your residual receipts, and they're saying they're going to access those residual receipts, and are not just saying, they are in fact accessing your residual receipts to save money on the Section 8 side of the house. They're taking money from that account and offsetting Section 8 payments with it. They have the right to do it. It's, as I said, HUD controls that money. And I think it's one way that they looked at how do we address the concerns. Congress continually has a concern about the increasing cost of this program. HUD wants to be able to honor all of its contractual obligations. So they are doing everything they can to keep the money flowing to as many projects, as many contracts as possible, not have to do rent reductions where you're all relying on those rents to keep the project viable. But that's one thing they're doing. And the other, and again, some of you may be familiar with this, is looking closely at buildings that are known as exception rents. That's a lot of 202s. Some other buildings qualify for above market rents under the Section 8 renewal program. And those are being looked at very closely. And it's going to be tougher to get into increases in those rents going forward. Again, HUD is not looking to cut them, but they are trying to protect us from the increasing Section 8 budget. So those are a couple of broad points on sequestration and Section 8 funding. I'd like to switch quickly, and I'm talking about as quick as I can, to what I think is the more optimistic and positive and good things that are going on at HUD. And our firm does a lot of work with HUD on preservation transactions, and have worked with some of the people who are here in the audience and been able to successfully preserve HUD-assisted housing and to ensure its continued affordability, and where it is necessary, notwithstanding what I just said about Section 8 and concerns about funding, where it's necessary, get increased resources, either under the voucher program or under the project-based Section 8 program, to make preservation transactions happen. Chris mentioned the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, the RAD program. How many people here are somewhat familiar with RAD? A few of you are. Basically, if you have ever managed a property or owned a property that has a Section 8 mod rehab contract here in the city, they're often contracts with HPD. It's actually administered by HUD's Office of Public Housing. Or a rental assistance payments or rent supplement contract. Those are all what are known as orphan programs. The reason that they're called that is because there's no funding for them anymore. They were funded at the very beginning of the life of that contract, which in many cases is over 35 years ago. They were funded for 40 years. That obviously creates a crisis, but that also means those buildings are 40 years old in a lot of cases. So what HUD did is created this program with the goal of not only protecting the residents who are currently assisted by those contracts, but enabling owners who do have those contracts on their buildings to actually undertake a preservation effort. So they are working with the HUD, it's a joint effort between HUD's Office of Multifamily Housing and the Office of Public Housing. And we've worked on a number of these. I think I'm probably working on about 7 right now. There are a lot of properties here in New York that have these types of contracts. It really is an opportunity. If the contract is just coming to an end and that's all that's happening and it's not really ripe for a preservation refinancing, you can just get it converted to a project-based voucher contract. But if there's an opportunity to do a refinancing and really undertake a broader preservation of the building, that's what a lot of owners are looking to do. And HUD has been very supportive of this. And the city and state agencies are also very supportive of doing these deals. So it's a real opportunity. If you own or manage one of those properties that has one of those types of contracts, I encourage you to get up to speed on it, learn more about it, and talk to folks about how you might be able to do that. It also ties in, does anybody here administer NYAHMA properties? A few people do. You probably have heard about it. I just want to mention this a little bit off of the HUD topic for a second, but it ties into what we're talking about with Brad. You have probably heard there's something going on with the state NYAHMA portfolio. It actually is moving ahead. As probably some folks in the audience know, a lot of the state NYAHMAs were originally financed by what was then known as the Urban Development Corporation, or UDC, which now is called the Empire State Development Corporation, ESDC. They've continued to hold the mortgages on those properties, even though they have nothing to do with housing anymore. This is, a predecessor program. The state HFA is the one who does all the housing for the state now. But they had these mortgages, and it was a real problem because they frankly weren't terribly motivated to look at the future of the residents of those buildings and ensure the property was being maintained well, and if there was a need to refinance it, put more money into it. It wasn't their priority because they're an economic development agency. I talked about when I was Commissioner of Housing a number of years ago, and something the state has talked about for a long time. It's finally happening. The state HFA is going to be taking over that portfolio of buildings. It's well along in the process. We're actually anticipating it'll happen by the end of May, beginning of June at the latest. And for people who have those buildings, what you should know, or if you're possibly going to be approached about owning or managing one of those buildings, the state is very interested in refinancing those properties, getting new assistance in. A lot of them have the rent supplement and RAP contracts on them, so they'll be candidates for RAD to get new rental assistance into those properties and to use that new rental assistance to preserve the property, refinance it, and do a lot of rehab work to it. So it's something you're going to hear. I mean, this is something, I got to tell you, I worked in state government for a bunch of years when housing was never mentioned by anybody at the governor's office. The governor talked about this portfolio in his State of the State message this year. That's how important it is to the state. The last thing I'll mention quickly, which is also on preservation and going back to the HUD portfolio, is some of you have probably managed or owned buildings that have gone through mark-to-market or have gone through a Section 230-60 coupling or as a 202 that has been refinanced. What we've been working with HUD, all of those programs are still out there and are active programs, perhaps less so than they were at one time because a lot of buildings have been refinanced or decoupled or have already gone through mark-to-market. But what we've been working on with a lot of owners and managers, and also again with the New York HUD office, who has been a great partner, is what I would call, the second bite deals, second bite at the apple. Some of these properties, even though they were refinanced and did some rehabilitation work on them, say 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, may have additional capital needs or something else is going on with the property that there's a reason to revisit that transaction. HUD has made available tools to do a second refinancing of those properties. I love in the Section 202 refinancing notice, they actually call it a refinancing. There's a section in the notice that's called that. We call them re-decouplings or a post-mark-to-market transaction. It's another opportunity, so you shouldn't feel if you own or manage a property that was refinanced through HUD a number of years ago under one of these programs, and you're really struggling with the property and you just, there's ongoing maintenance issues and you really need to figure out how am I going to keep this property viable for another, 15 or 20 or 25 years. There are opportunities to do something with those buildings. So I mentioned that, and again, on behalf of the folks at HUD headquarters who aren't able to be with us today, this is a real focus for them. They have really moved a lot of resources into what they call the Office of Affordable Housing Preservation, which used to be the part of HUD that only did the mark-to-market program, but more of these types of programs and more of these types of transactions are going to be going through that office. So it's a priority for them to have that office staffed and have HUD headquarters folks focused on preservation. The president even put in his, this is my last point, the president put in his budget this year, you may know in the tax credit program, there's general federal rules, and then the states really get to decide how they run each tax credit program, or the city does in the city of New York. The president put in his budget this year that he wants something put in the federal tax code, so it would apply to every state, that they have to have something about preservation and how they administer their low-income housing tax credit program. This is how important it is to HUD and to our partners at the federal government. So, again, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say hello to you all today, and enjoy your lunch.
Hi, any questions for Deborah before?
No, next time, of course. His question is the budget going to affect the RCSs? As you know, there's been a funding shortfall for rent comparability studies that had nothing to do with sequestration. Again, that was a pre-existing problem. You know, what I would say is we know something about how HUD is going to deal with their lack of resources or the reduction in resources. As we talked about, you know, they put out the schedule for furlough of HUD employees. They put out this information on what's going to happen with project-based Section 8 funding and voucher programs. I have not seen anything specific on rent comparability studies. So I don't know if Teresa or George or Christine, if you guys have heard anything. Right. So I haven't seen any specific guidance on that.
Deborah,
Yes, Mr. Conroy.
being a politician like you and Hunter, I want to just tell everybody that I remember back many years ago when there was a big threat to rent supplement. And I had every tenant in every one of my buildings that was on rent supplement send a postcard to their assemblyman, to their state senator, to their congressman, and to the United States Senate. Within 24 hours, I got a call that time from Dick Oettinger, a couple other congressional people. Don't worry, Gene, we're not going to do anything with it. Any of you that have project-based Section 8, I suggest that you start to rally your tenants that have project-based Section 8 and start to have, you can give them postcards or start a campaign that you can supervise, to have them start writing letters to every one of their elected officials and tell them, I'm Mrs. Jones, I'm 75, I'm on Section 8, I get $1,000 a month in Social Security, I pay only $300 a month rent, and that's correct. And I guarantee you, if you do enough of that they're not going to cut anybody's project-based Section 8. They have a lot more juice than you think, and you just have to use it.
Yeah, and to follow up on Gene's point, one thing we are seeing in Washington is, you know, sequestration, the thing about it was across the entire federal government. Nothing was exempted. Well, guess what? They've already gone back in, so that everybody's heard about meat safety inspections. They were literally going to have to shut down the entire the entire agricultural industry because they couldn't do inspections. So they went in and exempted it. And they said, okay, well, except for meat inspections, we're going to let that go forward. Now they're talking about doing air traffic control. Both of those things I totally support restoring. But there is, especially meat safety. But there, yeah, I agree with you. There's an opportunity, and a lot of other interest organizations and people who are affected by other federal budget cuts are going to do this. They're going to lobby, and they're going to be aggressive about saying, our program should be exempted from these cuts. So I think
We have a wonderful product, and we should just fight, because we'll win.
I agree.
And she's a Democrat and I'm a Republican, believe
And
me.
we still have
Quick question, Deborah.
Yeah.
With 202s and refinanced once,
Yes.
using F, and considering refinancing, using F, not conventional, is anything new regarding the loss of the lower exemption?
You know, I'd have to look at the notice. As I said, there's a section in the 202 refinancing notice that deals with refinancings, and there is something in there on rents and what happens with them, but I don't recall specifically what it is.
Well, no, but I was wondering if there's anything new following that. There's nothing else under discussion at this point.
No, not at this point. Yeah, the latest notice on 202 refinancings came out last year. It had been about 10 years since HUD originally created the program. They came out with a new program. It's very similar to the old, but there are some nuances in it. So,
Anything else? Well, if not, thank you, Deborah, so much. Before we break, Teresa just has one announcement she'd like to make, and then we're all invited to have lunch.
I just wanted to let you know, because I just received an email from our Office of Fair Housing, that tomorrow, actually, there's going to be a training session being hosted by the New York State Division of Human Rights. And it's actually going to be at 26 Federal Plaza, but it will cover federal and state regulations protecting individuals and families from housing discrimination, compliance with Fair Housing Act design and construction requirements. And it also, if you're an architect, you can get free continuing ed credits. It's tomorrow, so tomorrow's the 25th. It's at 26 Federal Plaza on the 6th floor. Registration begins at 8:30. Session should be ending about 3:30. But the one thing you need to do is you need to RSVP. And let me give you that site. It's RSVP at dhr.ny.gov. So if you're interested in attending, it's open to everyone. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Just one last announcement. We at the board of NYAHMA try to put together educational programs. So if there are things that you want to be educated on, please email us at info@nyahma.org. So please. And with that, Catherine and I were up all night making sandwiches and cooking, all right? So please partake. Thank you very much.